This is an addendum to the story of...
Okay, well, in 1946, when after the war, and he had already established his contact with Austin, he asked if I wanted to go with him to Europe. Well, I was only 15 at that time, August. And so, even though my parents were divorced, my mom said, sure, okay. And off I went with him. We took the Queen Mary over. And it was the last trip that Queen Mary had before it went into
Dry dock?
to be refurbished, because it was a troop ship.
Oh, okay. Oh.
But because my dad was a shipper, we got officers' treatment, and we had twin beds and a stateroom, and most of the people slept on these little straw mattresses, stacked. You know, I mean, that's what they did for the troops. And we had real beds. And so we went over, and we went to Birmingham, to the Austin plant. That was an eye-opener for me, because I realized how antiquated the British system was at that time. I mean, before the war and during the war, when you see TV shows and they show, actually, these are like the BBC puts on, and things were still bombed out, you know. In 1946, it was not very good, and they didn't have food. These things were rationed, and they were celebrating because only 85% of their hot dogs, or bangers, they called them, breakfast sausages, were sawdust. 15% meat now. And so anyway, we went to the Birmingham plant, and my dad was livid with the proposal of the new cars, because it still had the headlights mounted on the fenders, independent. And he said, all the cars have their headlights mounted in the fenders. You've got to be updated. You can't do this. And he was telling him how to design their car for the American market. You just can't do that. But they just, old school, very hard to change. Very hard to change. But in the factory, I was really amazed. I kind of a little whistle blew, and the workers would stop the line, and they would go to a big washing basin kind of thing, where there was a special faucet, and boiling water came out of that special faucet. And they actually had tin cans with a little wire hoop, and they would fill that with hot water and make tea. They had tea break. And I thought, what year is this? This is 1946, August. And things were just so, it was like year 1900 in our factories. I never thought about that. Then later on, when I went to the GM plant, I saw the Chrysler line, the Cadillac line. And that was the shortest line that they had, and I was allowed to go see that, and the body drop and all that sort of thing. And boy, when I contrast that situation, was nowhere near what it is now. It's so automated now. But these poor guys with their little tin can and their wire hoop, getting their tea.
I have a vivid memory of this.
Yeah.
You're 15 at the time.
Yeah. So I became 16 as I returned. We came back on the Queen Elizabeth, and that was the maiden voyage of the Queen Elizabeth, because people had, thought that they were going to go on the Queen Elizabeth, and then the war started, and instead of finishing the Queen Elizabeth in its beautiful state, they made it a troop carrier, and so it carried troops too, to Europe, and so this was the maiden voyage, and so people who had made their reservations were now practically in wheelchairs. They were older people, and there was one young guy on the voyage, And his name was Donald, but his parents' name was Duck. He was Donald Duck. I mean,
I'm sorry,
he
that
was
to the camera here.
he was adult. He was adult. And but something interesting. They had some dignitaries on the ship, and oh God, I forgot his
That's
name.
okay.
Not Khrushchev. Molotov. Molotov was on his way to San Francisco to sign some big deal, and this was October of 1946, and he was on the boat. And he, at dinner time, I mean, we noticed, my dad saw him way off there. He said, Molotov. I looked, oh, by golly. You know, with his little pinchy glasses, and he was a little guy. And he got up, and then behind him was his little entourage. Little, they were monsters. They were like Notre Dame guards, military people. And he would march out before dinner, and people actually left. And so my dad said, why don't you get his autograph? Oh, who, me? Who, me? Yeah. So I brought paper and my trusty Schaefer pen with me the next night for dinner, and he got up to leave, and my dad said, go get him, kid. So I followed him out, and he went up on the promenade deck, and they were gathered around lighting cigarettes and so forth. And so I went up to Molotov, and I said, may I have your autograph? So then, feigning that he didn't understand me, he turned to his interpreter. He was the same interpreter for a lot of them. He was also for Khrushchev, but I can't remember. It started with a T, his name. And as he asked, what was your geography? Oh, and so he says, Kakai, I mean, why? And I said, thinking really smart, for my school. And he gave me his autograph. So that was pretty good. I was taller than he was. This little fellow. So he sure caused a lot of trouble for being such a little guy. Anyway, that was so. But that was a trip back, and then I went back to school, and the principal said to me, because I came in October, I was a month late for school, a little more than a month late for school. And he says, you'll never graduate with your class. And so he said, well, we'll put you on extension. You can try. And fortunately, all my math classes were over. I didn't miss that. Didn't have any language, so I didn't miss that. I had creative writing. Well, I had a wealth of information, and I brought back brochures and things from the trip. I wrote on everything. I wrote on the Queen Mary, and it was on 1,100 feet. The promenade deck was 1,100 feet, and I gave them all this stuff, and it was not very stable. It was because it was so skinny, it rolled, and they were really not very sure of it when it rolled more than a certain degrees. And I wrote all this stuff. Well, I just came off with flying colors. I didn't have any classes that put that kind of pressure on me, so I did graduate in my class.
Wow, you have very interesting stories. What a history.
Yeah, but it put me way ahead. From that time on, when I had 2 months of reading Time magazine and the newspapers, and not kids stuff or funny books or movie magazines, I was pretty adept at what was going on in the world, and I changed me from then on. So I had a different outlook on things than my classmates, and it made a difference. I was a step ahead of everybody.
Yeah. Oh, I understand. I understand that very much. Wow, thank you for sharing.
Sure.
Appreciate that.